Hi, grade fours. So I got a request from one of you to read another story. And I thought, let's try something different and listen to some spooky stories. And this story comes actually from Alberta, and it's called History Comes Alive. And I thought that was a really interesting story, especially since we're talking about Alberta's history in social studies. So I thought that maybe this would be an interesting story to get us all in the spooky spirit. So let's start. It was the middle of the night, and all was silent and dark. A security guard patrolled the grounds of the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village. Has anyone been there before? A living history museum located 50 kilometers east of Edmonton. Ooh, the ghosts are close by. During the day, costume interpreters portrayed the lives of pioneers in the historic buildings that have been painstakingly restored. But at night, the village more closely resembled a ghost town. As the guard made his rounds, he heard a chilling sound coming from within the Horlack house, the cries of a frantic baby. Shadows moved behind the curtains of the first floor windows, but no one else was in the village. Was there a thief in the house? If someone had broken in, why had they brought in a baby? The guard had a bad feeling. Cautiously, he entered the house and stood in the front foyer for a moment to gather his courage. The baby's cries grew louder and more intense as he walked down the hall, poking his head into each room as he passed. When he peered into one of the rooms near the rear of the house, he saw a woman in old-fashioned clothing rocking an antique cradle. The guard couldn't see into the cradle, but he knew the baby's cries were coming from within it. As he approached the woman, she turned and quickly left. He followed her into the next room and immediately wished he hadn't. The woman was gone, and the room she entered had no other exit. The baby continued to cry. The guard returned to the adjoining room and saw that the cradle was still rocking, but now on its own. He crept toward it and stole a look inside. It was empty. He reached out a trembling hand, but before he had laid a finger on it, the cradle came to a sudden stop. The unseen baby also stopped crying, as if the mother and child were afraid of the guard, unaware of how terrified he was of them. Many people have had similar experiences in that Horlack house, and the most popular theory is that the ghostly mother who haunts the building is Vasilina Horlack. Her house was purchased and moved to the Ukrainian Cultural Village after her death in 1967. Vasilina had 9 children in whom she instilled high moral values. She was busy and hardworking and had no patience for foul language, a fact one of the costumes interpreters of the Ukrainian Cultural Village would soon find out. So this is a picture of the Horlack family. So the Horlack family, November 1928. In the front row, left to right, this is Vasilina here. So that's the spooky ghost woman, supposedly. Mike and Pearl in the back row. There's Anne, Kate, Nancy, Nick, Rose, Andy, and Lena. Josh Gretschner portrayed the town's British constable in the summer of 2014. And it wasn't long before he heard the ghostly rumors about the Horlack house. Does anybody know what a British constable is? So a constable is kind of like a police officer. So he would be portraying like a British like law enforcement officer, kind of. Countless employees had heard footsteps and baby's cries, seen doors open and close on their own, and chairs skitter across the floor. Some had even caught sight of the mother. Curiosity consumed Josh, so he asked a security guard, Amin, to let him explore the village after nightfall. He wanted to see if it was really as haunted as everyone said. "It is," Amin said. "There's noises in all of the buildings. pots and pans rattling, footsteps. Amin went on to share something that gave him the creeps about the Horlack house. I drive past at night doing inspections, and one time I saw lights from candles in the windows. Woo! Nothing spookier than candles. When Josh asked if he'd gone in to check out what was happening, Amin simply answered, "I don't want to know." Despite some reluctance, Amin eventually agreed to Josh's request to take him on an after-hours tour. In the middle of the night, the two met up at the admin building, then drove through the village. They heard the distant sound of a ringing telephone from one of the old period houses, despite the fact that none of them had working phones. Amin began to have second thoughts and wanted to go back, but Josh insisted they continue. He wanted to take a quick visit to the Horlack house. Amin urged Josh not to go into the house, but when Josh entered anyway, he followed. Josh had been told by another employee that he should ask the mother for permission to enter her house. Although it seemed like a silly notion during the day, at night it somehow made sense. He asked permission to enter, and the door opened easily. The pair walked in and found the house to be empty and desolate. Ooh, desolate. That's a word from our Holsworth inquiry. There was, however, a cradle in the middle of one room. Luckily, it wasn't rocking, and no sound came from within. "Finished?" Amin asked, anxious to leave. "I need to go upstairs," Josh said. He had come this far. He had to go a little further. Amin refused to accompany him and waited downstairs. As Josh climbed the stairs, which creaked and groaned as he made his way up, Josh looked inside the rooms. The beds were all made from, and period clothing was laid out as if someone was about to rise from a deep slumber and get dressed for the day. Amin cried out. Something on the main floor had scared him badly enough to make him curse out loud. Suddenly, Josh heard footsteps race down the hallway and one of the bedroom doors slammed shut. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. He had seen enough. He and Amin got out of there. It wasn't until later that Josh was told Vasilina wouldn't tolerate cursing in her home. Although Amin didn't tell Josh what had given him such a scare, it was safe to assume that his foul language had caused Vasilina to run down the hall and slam the door, scaring them out of her house. The Horlack house isn't the only building on the property that's haunted. And the mother and baby aren't the only ghosts either. Other staff members have seen salt and pepper shakers move on their own in the Pai Pao house and heard ghostly tapping on the tapping sounds on the windows. People have reported hearing footsteps and whispers in empty buildings and have seen odd lights and shadows floating through the village. Even the center's gift shop, which isn't a historical building, is believed to be haunted. One night, as a young employee was closing up, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps slowly approaching her. She looked up from her work just as a shadowy figure materialized out of thin air. It was a man in old-fashioned clothing. He silently stared at her through a glass cabinet. As far as he appeared, he then disappeared. Or as fast as he appeared, he then disappeared. Feeling uncertain about what she'd just seen, she walked around the glass cabinet to double-check that no one was lingering in the shop. There was no one there. But then, an invisible force rushed past her, spinning her around and nearly knocking her off her feet. A few nights later, she was alone once more. Or so she thought. While placing glass figurines on display, she heard the same heavy footsteps slowly approaching. This time, they passed her. She followed the sound, and the man appeared again. But staring her down for an intense moment, he disappeared. But the woman could still hear him walk away. She followed the footsteps, turned a corner into the museum area, and caught sight of the man. He was now translucent. Ooh, a science word. Remember when we were talking about how light hits objects and there's 3 different types of objects? Think about what translucent means. He was now translucent, and he was walking through a wall without hesitating or slowing down. A different employee was responsible for restoring a period farmhouse. Much of her work needed to be completed after hours when the village was empty. As she swept the floor within the barn one night, she heard the sound of horse hooves on the dirt road outside. That didn't make sense. No one else was supposed to be nearby, least of all any of the historical interpreters. Confused and intrigued, she stopped sweeping and stepped outside. She saw the same man in the other employee had seen in the gift shop. He was standing in front of a wagon that was hitched to 2 black horses. When he spotted her, he beckoned her to get into his wagon, but he didn't utter a word. Oddly, the horses didn't make a sound either. When the man gestured for her to get into his wagon once more, the woman panicked and ran back to the farmhouse. She grabbed a walkie-talkie, started to call someone for help, and peered back outside. But the man, the horses, and the wagon had all vanished without a trace. The dedicated, passionate team that work hard to maintain the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Center are proud to bring history to life each and every day. But many of them know that in this unique living museum, history never died. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my little spooky story today. Thank you for listening. I will try to record some more stories for you guys to listen to. I miss you guys a lot. Goodbye.